this for all posterity. So Anita, welcome. Thank you for joining us. If you're, Anita is one of my all-time new favorite friends. She is one of the nicest people in the world. She's from Canada. Of course,
Yep.
That's all you would expect. Never met a Canadian I didn't like. So thank you, Anita, for joining us today. I know it's later for you. Welcome aboard. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Ed. And thanks everyone for joining me. For me, it's this evening. It's after 6, your late afternoon. Hope that I can kick things off here with this presentation. And my favorite part is always the discussion. So I'm looking for some great questions that you have or things that you're wondering about, not just about exit interviews, but customer feedback in general. So let's get this started. I'm going to just share my screen. Can you just confirm that you can see it? Yep, we good? All right. So I'm going to just stop my video here and let's get started. So we know that it's never easy learning that a customer is leaving, but as they prepare to leave, you have a rare opportunity to find out why. And exit interviews, when properly structured and executed, provide a unique chance to dig down deep and discover valuable information that can lead to actionable churn-preventing insights. So in this session, we'll cover how to conduct killer exit interviews, expert ways to dig down deep and discover the most valuable information from exiting customers, and how to take that valuable data and use it to prevent other customers from leaving. So the purpose of exit interviews is really to gather valuable customer feedback to better understand why customers have chosen to leave and to prevent future churn. Now, this valuable data can be used cross-functionally to reduce churn and increase revenues. So your product team will be able to build the feature requirements most tied to revenue and churn. Your marketing team will be able to use the feedback to create stronger messaging and attract better fitting customers. And your customer success and sales teams will be able to set better expectations in the sales process and across the customer journey. So by having a systematic exit interview strategy, you'll capture critical insights to make faster revenue driving changes. And just a little bit about me, that's me, Anita Toth. I've been conducting feedback interviews for over 20 years. And what you're going to learn today is based on the methods we used in the University Research Institute that I worked in. And I've helped my clients create and prepare their exit interviews to collect that golden data that helps reduce churn and drive revenues. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So before I jump in, I want to talk briefly just about the different levels of data. And this is to help you understand why it's critical to have both qualitative and quantitative methods in your customer feedback strategy. So customer data falls into 3 categories. The first one is general data. And this is broad information that is collected, viewed, and analyzed at the population level. And what general data is good at is showing trends over a period of time. So given its power to show trends over time, one of the advantages of general data is that it can be used for benchmarking and trend analysis. So some examples, as you know, NPS, CSAT, customer effort score, and cancellation surveys where answers are pre-populated, either in a scale or in a small choice of responses. Then we have medium data, and it is in the middle between very broad general data and very specific deep data. And unlike general data, which consists of quick questions, which can be answered in 10 seconds or less, medium data takes longer to answer and gives greater insights into what individuals are thinking. And the greatest advantage in medium data over general data is that the respondent is able to answer the open-ended questions with their own words. And if analyzed correctly, responses to open-ended questions can also be categorized for themes, which can be tracked over time. But unlike general data, which is numerical and can be easily plotted on graphs, changes in themes over time require monitoring, which needs to be added and deleted as patterns are changing. So changing themes are a good indication of how customers' wants, needs, and desires are shifting, and it can be very useful in making strategic decisions. And surveys are the most common type of medium data. Surveys can be created for a number of reasons, such as gathering feedback on new product features or services, or even giving clarity on a specific issue. So just like with general data, NPS, CSAT, customer effort score, and cancellation surveys are the types of surveys where customers can write in or explain their responses. Now, deep data is by far the most valuable and useful information to companies because it goes so deep into the thoughts, feelings, goals, and desires of customers. And deep data yields information not readily accessible by both general and medium data methods. So, in many ways, deep data is the true voice of the customer. Now, without question, deep data is also, unfortunately, the most expensive, time consuming, and labor intensive way to gather critical customer data. And general data, on the other hand, is the cheapest, easiest, and requires the least amount of effort to interpret the result. And medium data sits somewhere between those two extremes. But it's because of the time and effort involved in collecting deep data that the information gathered is the most insightful and the most valuable to any business. I'm just going to show this to you one last time so you understand. The general data at the top, again, is just where you have no chance to respond. There's no text box or comment box. Medium data is where customers are able to put that information, just type in the responses. And the deep data, of course, are the focus groups and the interviews. So again, your customer feedback strategy should include all three levels of this data. Okay, I just wanted to lay that out, get that in your minds. And what we can do now is switch direction and start looking specifically at exit interviews. Now, all interviews have a 3-step interview process. You have the pre-interview, the interview, and not surprisingly, the post-interview. And we're going to go through each of these by step so you have an understanding of what's involved with them. So the first one is the pre-interview. And within the pre-interview step, there are actually what I call 5 Ps, and they're known as the strategic interview plan. And these 5 Ps, the first one is the purpose of the interviews. You need to know that. You need to plan for the people and the data, what you're going to do with them. You need to pre-write the questions for your exit interviews. You need to populate them with the right people, if this is possible, and to practice. So the purpose of the interviews, this one seems obvious, but the purposes of the interviews may differ according to what you're looking to achieve. For example, you might only be interested in interviewing decision makers, why they churn. Or maybe you might be interested in learning the top 3 reasons why certain product users churn. Or maybe you want to understand why accounts of a certain size are leaving. So as you can see, the reasons for conducting exit interviews are different. And by selecting one purpose for conducting the interview, everything you do around the exit interviews will be aligned with this one purpose. And having one purpose means that you have clarity throughout the process. So if something isn't clearly aligned with the one purpose, then it isn't included. Comparison. At the end of the interviews, you can compare results across every single person interviewed. And this becomes important because you want to make sure that what you're hearing from your customers isn't by accident. And lastly, completeness. The one goal helps ensure the entire process of creating, executing, and acting on the exit interviews is completed. So here is your exit interview best practice, and that is select one purpose for conducting the interviews. Now we're going to go on to the second P, which is plan for the people and the data. And truly, this is a stage where your exit interview strategy either succeeds or fails. And planning this part will help the rest of the process run smoothly. So we're going to start by looking at planning for the people. And one of the first questions you need to decide is, who is the interviewer? And interviewing is a skill. So just like with salespeople, you have okay salespeople, you have good salespeople, and you have your all-stars. And what differentiates the okay from the all-star salespeople is skill. So interviewing is a skill that takes years to perfect, but even in a few months, your interviewers can become good at interviewing your churned customers. And what you'll want to do actually is to dedicate 2 team members to undertake all the exit interviews. And the reason to dedicate team members is because it builds their interviewing skills. They'll be better able to identify emerging information, so new reasons why customers are leaving, and they won't be associated with the customer that they're interviewing. Now, you might be wondering about point number 3, that they won't necessarily be associated or have a relationship with the customer. And this might seem a bit counterintuitive given for customer success managers for the account will already have established relationships. But the reason why you want an interviewer who isn't associated with the account is because the customer can feel free to be more honest about their feelings without worrying that they might hurt the feelings of the CSM that they know. All right, so this is sometimes a bit of a surprising one, and that is, what is the appreciation thank you gift? Now, the customer is leaving. The exit interview is your last chance to speak with them before they go. And the customer has generously offered to spend time that they can never get back to be interviewed by your team. So the customer truly has no obligation to do this. And really, the customer is helping you out without obvious benefit to themselves. So this is your opportunity to make a good last impression, even if the customer is unhappy. And the appreciation thank you gift should be a choice of 2 different options. Something like to donate a set dollar amount in their name to the charity of their choice, or a set dollar amount gift card. And you'll want to set aside some budget to cover these options. You can choose how much each option should cost. I generally suggest between $25 to $150, depending on the level of the person you're interviewing. So anything less than this doesn't really show the value of the time that they just gave. And anything more than this may appear as if you're trying to entice them to come back. So just like you need to plan for the people part of your exit strategy, you'll also need to plan the data part. And the most common mistake that people make with their exit interview strategies and also their customer feedback strategies is they overlook this particular step. Now, we're all eager to start talking to customers, but the real driver of change is what you'll do with the data you'll gather. So let's focus on the second part, and that is planning for the data. Now, one of the reasons companies shy away from undertaking interviews is truly the amount of work that goes into processing the interview data. And at one time, we used to do this manually. So if you can imagine, for a 30-minute interview, way back in the day, it could take up to 1.5 hours to transcribe, clean, categorize, and analyze the data. Thankfully, with AI, a 30-minute interview can be processed in about a third of the time. So that's a huge savings, but you still need to plan for your data. And there are 4 W's to consider around your exit interview data. The first is, who owns this data? Is it you? Is it someone on the team? Is it another team in the company? That needs to be decided before you launch into the interviews. The second is, who can access the data within your department, also out of your department too. Get like product, sales, marketing. You also want to know who's going to analyze this data. So who's going to take the time to clean and analyze the data? So like I said, AI platforms are great and they'll do quick transcription. Unfortunately, it is not really great at this point. There's a lot of errors that are made. So someone needs to go through and correct the AI's mistakes. And the question is, who will that be? And then the bigger question is, who will analyze this data to look for trends between the customers that have been interviewed and over time? And lastly, who is responsible? So who is responsible for determining actionable items? and who is responsible for executing on them. Again, is it within your department, or is it other teams such as product, sales, or marketing? So just to review this section, these are the best practices. You want to have 2 team members dedicated to conducting all exit interviews. You want to choose an appropriate appreciation/thank you gift. And you want to decide on the 4 W's. So who owns the data, who can access the data, who will analyze the data, and who is responsible for executing on the data. All right, we're going to go on to the next P, which is pre-write the questions. I think this is the fun stuff because this is where you get to determine the types of questions you want answered. And as with everything you're doing with the exit interviews, the questions have to reflect the purpose that you determined in the first P, which was the purpose of the interviews. Now, if this is your first time running exit interviews, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to emphatically state, do not involve other teams in the process just yet. You'll want to have a full trial run of the exit interview process before bringing in other teams and possibly bringing their questions into the interviews. But if you're currently running exit interviews, input from other teams into the types of questions to ask is welcome, just so long as the questions they're wanting to be answered are aligned with that purpose that you determined in the first P, which was, again, the purpose of the interviews. So really, your exit interview should be no more than 30 minutes long. And this means approximately 5 to 10 questions only. I will explain what this means in the next section, so just bear with me for a quick second while I go through this. And your questions should be categorized into 2 or 3 themes. So, for example, if your goal is, oops, it's not forwarding. There we go. For example, if your goal is to understand why accounts of a certain size are leaving, your themes might be something like reasons for leaving. You might want to ask questions around why, how they felt, how they came to the decision. Might have questions around product, perhaps what they hope to achieve with the product, what did they like, what didn't they like. Excuse me, I just have to grab a sip of water. Okay. And then maybe something around communications. Were there too many touches, not enough? What did they like? What didn't they like? So just from this example alone, I have 3 different themes, and there's already 10 questions in just those little prompts I was mentioning. And that is plenty of questions for a 30-minute interview. So I'm going to just go through the best practices again. Your questions must align with the purpose of conducting the interviews. Interviews should be 30 minutes. They should have 2 or 3 themes with a maximum of 5 to 10 questions for the entire interview. All right. So this section of step 1, the pre-interview, can be the most challenging of all the pre-interview parts because there's really a desire to ask as many questions as you possibly can, but really you want no more than 5 or 10 because you're actually looking to probe deeper to get those really great responses. Okay, we are going to look at the next P, which is populate with the right people as much as possible. So populating with the right people is critical for the success of your exit interview strategy. Now, depending on the purpose of the interviews that you decided back in the beginning of the 5 Ps that we were talking about, the purpose of the interviews, who you will invite will differ. If your purpose is to get a better understanding of all customers in the account, then you'll be reaching out to everyone. However, if you're just wanting to speak with decision makers, then you'll only be reaching out to them. And this matters because you want to have enough customers to participate so that you can start seeing patterns. You start seeing patterns in the responses you get, usually with 10 or more interviews. And when you're first starting out, what you want to do is assume that only 5 to 10% of people will choose to participate. And this is particularly true for self success or low touch environments, and about 25% to 30% for high touch, unless you already have a very good customer engagement strategy. You're probably wondering, how do I recruit people into my exit interviews? There are two ways. The first is via cancellation survey, and the second is to directly ask them to participate. Now, if you're recruiting during via a cancellation survey, if you have a customer base that is self-success, so this is low touch or tech touch, the best way to recruit customers is through a cancellation survey. And the cancellation survey will provide you with some details about the reason for their canceling. And you can ask if they'd be willing to participate in a call to better understand those reasons. Now, if your customer base is high touch, asking for direct participation is the best course of action to take. And you can do this by either email or call, or even at the last QBR, EBR. As is the case with most of us, though, once we've decided to leave, and that can be a place, a job, a relationship, doesn't matter, our minds start focusing on the future and we want to move forward and leave the past behind. And this is truly the biggest obstacle you're facing in getting participants for your exit interviews. In their minds, they have already moved on. And that's why it's so important to ask for these interviews as soon as you find out the customer is leaving. Because unfortunately, every minute, hour, day, or week that slips by means your customers are less likely to participate. So if we're going to look at the best practices, there are two ways to recruit customers into your exit interviews. One is via cancellation survey, and the second is directly to ask them to participate. And again, assume low participation rates unless you have a strong customer feedback engagement strategy and system in place. So generally, it's about 4 times as many people that you want to ask, given, again, this tendency toward low participation rates. And the last one, practice. I touched on this earlier, but interviewing is a skill. And before your interviewers start interviewing customers, they really should practice mock interviews with the team. You want to use the questions you've created to see how they flow and if they need to be changed. You want to assign different scenarios to your mock customers so that some are leaving with a positive experience of your company and others are leaving with a negative experience. And you want to encourage your mock customers to express different emotions: joy, anger, disappointment, and ambivalence. And what this does is the interviewers will experience this range of emotions when they interview real customers. So it's immensely helpful for the interviewers to learn how to handle these emotions and practice scenarios where they can safely make mistakes and learn new ways of handling the interview process. So this best practice is practice positive and negative mock interviews with a different range of emotions. So everything we just covered up to this point is, as you can see in the top right corner there, is the pre-interview. We are now moving on to step 2, which is the actual interview itself. So I think interviews are fantastic. Yes, I know I'm a little biased, but this is where you can get deep knowledge that can inform action and help lead to stronger decisions. Now, I'm not going to spend much time here, but I'll take you through the basic structure of an interview. The first is the introduction, and this is where trust is built. So if it's done well, the customer should feel comfortable that they can share their true responses to your questions. What they will do is they will open up and share those things that are typically locked inside. This is truly the gold you're searching for. So trust has to be established early, and the customer has to feel safe enough that they can open up and tell you what they're really thinking and feeling. The second part is the biggest part of an interview, of course, is asking questions. pretty much straightforward. You just want to be aware of how you ask and when to probe the customer for more details in their responses. And lastly, the close. This is where you'll close the interview and offer the appreciation thank you gift. So really, this is probably the simplest part out of the entire process. At step 2, the interview. Each interview should have the following stages: an introduction, where you're asking questions, and you're closing. And the step 3, the post interview. So post interviews, now that the interviews are completed, it's time to make sense of the data and start tying it to team and company objectives and metrics. So what I suggest doing is collecting all your interviews into one place so that those teams and people who you identified earlier can easily access the data. So this could be something like a VOC program, your CRM, or even a Google Drive spreadsheet. The point is that it should all be brought into one place. So we're going to go through the steps involved here with the data. And the first thing you want to do is broadly categorize according to your themes. So you chose these themes way back in step 1 when you were pre-writing the interview questions. And I gave you this example. So if your goal was to understand why accounts of a certain size are leaving, excuse me, one sec. So if your goal is to understand why accounts of a certain size are leaving, your themes might be something like reasons for leaving, why, how they felt, how they came to the decision. Might be based on a theme around the product itself. My apologies. Hold on. My allergies have been acting up, and I'm so sorry, but my throat's getting a little ticklish here. The product. So you want to know what they hope to achieve, what they didn't like, what they did like. And if you had a theme around communications and you asked maybe there were too many touches, not enough, what did they like, what didn't they like? These themes you'll categorize with are, oh my goodness, so sorry. My apologies. The themes you'll categorize with are reasons for leaving, right here, product and communications. And it's going to look something like this. So this is a specific program that helps to tag. And you can see here where it's circled that we have a very broad tags for this data. Now, if we're going to look second for positive and negative sentiment. So the quickest way to determine actionable insights that can lead to churn reduction is by categorizing the interviews by sentiment. So positive, negative, and neutral. And this will help provide you with an overall sentiment. So in this example, you can see that out of the 55 interviews, 34 had some negative sentiment. You want to also look for smaller themes. So as you read through the interviews, you'll see that there are smaller themes that you can categorize, and these become the areas where actionable insights occur. So in the example I'm going to show you, you can see that attention to detail and responsiveness are 2 new smaller themes. So just to note that this example and the ones going forward from this point are not necessarily from exit interviews, but they're equally as useful for your customer feedback strategies. So I'm going to show you now. You can just have a read through it, and you can see where the attention to detail and responsiveness themes come up. Okay. So now that you've categorized big, you've got these smaller themes. What you want to do is rank these themes, these smaller themes, according to the biggest impact on churn and revenue, because this is what are going to be your actionable items moving forward. The other thing you're going to look for are stories. So case studies, use cases. To me, this is the best part of conducting exit interviews. It's the stories, the case studies, the use cases. So if trust was properly established in the intro of the interview, the customer should feel comfortable enough to share their true deep responses rather than their socially acceptable surface level ones. And what customers will do if that trust is established and they truly are feeling comfortable, they will open up and they will tell you stories, good and bad. And often in those stories, you'll hear their true thoughts. And this is because they're speaking. And when we speak, we tend not to filter our thoughts in speech as much as we do in text. So, in reading through the transcripts, you'll find stories, and these are case studies, and you'll also discover some new use cases too. Now, here's an example I want you to read. I want to see if you can figure out the main story being told here and the possible outcome that may happen with this particular customer. There it is. All right. So, the main story here is that the customer has gone from being satisfied with the service to this point, and they're now experiencing frustration. So, the outcome of this, if the situation doesn't continue, is that the customer is a high risk of churning. And these stories become the basis to brainstorm the right improvements to address the situation raised by the customer. And this is because they're the customer's actual words, thoughts, and feelings. So it becomes harder to disregard or question their words, thoughts, and feelings. And what you'll also want to do is look at the CSM's internal notes about the reasons the customer gave as to why they're leaving. And you may discover there's a bigger gap than anticipated between the CSM's notes and the customer's view in the exit interview. And the last part of the post interview is sharing the results to drive action. So by this point, you're ready to share the results of your interviews with those teams and team members you identified way back in step 1 in the pre-interview stage. So what you're going to do is send an email to internal stakeholders, informing them of the trends that you've seen in the exit interviews. You'll want to meet with internal stakeholders to review the feedback you've gathered. You want to assign actions in an accessible place to the respective area of the business where the churn or revenue impact will be the greatest. You definitely want to measure the change in sentiment over time. You'll want to email internal stakeholders to get updates on progress and provide visibility into the impact of the action. So if the customer left because of a feature that's lacking, you could reach out to them in the future and let them know when this feature might be available. And if necessary, you can hand this off to your sales team to follow up. And you can reconnect with your customer roughly 90 days after the last date of service, because you never know if they're working with a competitor, they might not be satisfied and maybe they're willing to reconsider. So it's always worth reaching out again. You could create a special offer for canceled clients. So for example, they could come back within a specific time frame without incurring implementation fees a second time. So for this post-interview part, here are the best practices. You want to collect your interviews in one place. You want to broadly categorize the themes. You want to look for positive and negative sentiment. Then you want to look for those smaller themes. You want to gather those stories, case studies, and use cases, and then you want to share the results to drive action. I'm going to go over 3 principles to help guide you. The first is that the customer is doing you a favor by participating. They have no stake in this, but you do. And really, you want to respect the value they're giving and their time, which they'll never get back. So that's the first principle to guide you. The second principle is you want to dig down into the feelings. All human decisions are made on emotion first and then backed up by cognitive processes. So it's not enough to find out why they canceled. It's not enough to understand their thinking. You want to know how they felt and what impact did that decision have on them or their team. So sentiment will point out the gaps in expectation, and that's where you'll find the most actionable information to affect better churn management. And lastly, getting a high participation rate for your exit interviews and actually for all of your customer feedback means you need to have a strong feedback engagement strategy and system. So high participation rates, they don't happen in a vacuum. They are purposefully created and developed. And as much as you can, let your customers know they are valued and that their opinion matters. You want to show them this and not tell them, and they'll happily participate in your surveys and interviews. And lastly, not every customer can be saved, and not every customer should be saved. But if you have a strong customer feedback strategy and system, you can gain that valuable information that leads to lower churn and higher revenues. So that is it. Thank you all for my coughing and being patient with me there. Thankfully, I had that section where you could read, so I could take a little drink of water, but happy to answer any questions you might have. I know that was a fair bit I bet I went through, but yeah, happy to answer those questions.
Anita, thank you so much. I felt that exact feeling, so I can relate. No worries. It definitely did not distract. I know that you're talking to a group of CS professionals, and myself included. But I'm curious, when you talk about 2 members conducting the exit interviews and them being removed from the relationship as much as possible.
Mhm.
If you weren't talking to us, do you have a personal preference for who should be doing that? Like, in a perfect world, is that almost its own department, or is that a marketing function or a product function, or it is a CS function, or yeah, who should be doing that, or a third party outside the company?
Right. So there's always like what is the best. Sometimes third party is the best because again, interviewing is a skill.
Yeah.
So people that do this for a living, you get to know how to probe for those deeper answers, and what where you should probe as well, where you should just let things go. My recommendation is more on a person and a person type rather than a department. Somebody that can listen well is very helpful, and someone who can establish that trust. It doesn't matter, you can be the greatest interviewer in the world, but in those first few minutes, if trust isn't established and the interviewee does not feel comfortable, you can ask the greatest questions in the world, but you're going to get those surface level answers. So it's somebody who can, you know, how sometimes you meet people and you feel just comfortable enough with them that you feel like opening up details you wouldn't. If there's someone that kind of has that personality, those types of people are sort of the best to start with, and then other people can develop the skill, and I think that's the great part about it. It just helps if someone is like that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are the best. But I certainly would start there and then see who wants to develop the skill. If there's people who want to raise their hand, then I would say absolutely do that. And the biggest thing is just practice. Like just like sales, this is very similar. You've got to establish that rapport, that relationship. It just takes practice.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Amy. I do have to say that in a previous role, when I was working for the Success League, I worked with two of our larger customers on doing exit interviews. And so I was not part of the company. And I feel like, I don't know if that's why I got the answers that I got, but I felt like I was almost like an uninterested third party. So they felt like they could really unload. Now, these customers weren't really happy. So I had to really like twist their arm with lots of requests, and it's only going to take 10 minutes, not 30 minutes, and 3 questions. Like I had to really entice some of these customers to give the feedback. But I found that depending on how bad the situation is, like if you're just introducing this as a program, it's one thing to have somebody from marketing or maybe the CEO or, some other head of product, like do these interviews. That seems like a little bit more, but in this situation, it felt like even though I was the acting leader of the CS team at that time, trying to hire my replacement, I used the Success League as my lead-in because that's my employer at the time. And I got a lot more people and it changed when I ran the report in Salesforce as to why the customers left. The top 3 reasons changed.
Right.
They were different than which was eye-opening. And it wasn't that people were lying, but they were not asking the questions and they weren't getting like the real root of to the problem. So I think sometimes it depends on how bad the situation is. If you're really trying to dig into why is our churn so high? If you're just trying to add to the program, I think it's easy enough to build it internally and get it done right to begin with. But I think if you're in a bad place, like this customer was,
Right.
I think having someone like our speaker here take hold and do some of those interviews can be enlightening.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Amy. This is, and Harris, when you asked the question, the reason why I try as much as possible to keep things in-house is because exit interviews, in my opinion, should not be the only interviews going on. This should be a program that's not just with product. Like that's great. That's a whole other set. But interviewing customers is just a regular practice to see where they are before things get so bad that they're either leaving out of anger. And then, that's a very tough time to then try to dig to find out exactly why they may not even want to talk to you anymore. So to Amy's point, sometimes it's good to bring in a third party that is removed because customers sometimes feel more comfortable with that. Other times though, you want to keep it in-house, and as much as possible, that's my preference, because you can parachute a team in at any time, they can do these and then they go. But I feel the real value is in training, because those listening skills, those probing skills, they become great just in your regular job, even with dealing with your coworkers in your personal life. Like it's applicable to more than just this particular situation. So I'm always like hands up as much as possible to keep it in-house and keep it as part of a regular practice. Thank you so much for mentioning that, Amy, because boy, oh boy, when you have someone who's upset, that's a whole different ball game. And there are some specific strategies you need to employ around that.
Right. And it just depends on, like I said, how bad the problem is.
Mhm.
If you feel like you really just don't have a good understanding, I have a cough too, can be a quick way of bringing in and ferreting out those answers pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Versus
Yeah.
both are
Indeed.
important, but then you build that larger program. Like I
Yep.
said, I wouldn't want to spend the money that it takes to bring in a consultant every time.
Yep.
But it can be helpful to kick that off and get that going.
Yep. I agree. Thank you,
Anita, I'd
Amy.
like to jump in here real
Mhm.
quick. It's almost top of the hour, and I know people are going to want to drop here, but just real briefly, I have a whole list of questions I want to send to you and get some answers on.
Yeah,
We're out
I'll
of time.
happily do that.
But if you could tell people just very briefly, Anita, how can you help them and how can they contact you if they have questions?
Great. I do have, let me just share my screen here again and go back here. I'm a LinkedIn fan, huge fan of LinkedIn. So just mention once you connect with me over there that we had this. The other place is just my very unique email address there, Anita Toth at anitatoth.ca. You can email me there. I don't mind. I know I had sent it to Ed. I've taken the best practices from this and made a mini guide for you guys. So he will send that. The other thing is, if you want to send your questions to Ed, because you're right, we're almost at the top of the hour, I'll record a video and just answer them. I think that that's probably the easiest way to do it versus trying to type answers. I do have to ask this one thing. Please be specific as you can so that I can actually get you the answers that make sense and help you feel good about that. Does that work? Yeah.
That's great.
Okay,
Anita.
that's awesome.
Thank
I
you.
know Tim has his hand up here. Do we have a minute?
Yeah, it's top of the hour. If people want to stay on and continue to ask questions, if you have the time, Anita, that's great. I just want to make sure before people do a hard stop here, but I'd love to stay on for a few more minutes.
Yeah.
If there's others that want to, that would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think you just answered my question there, but just a best practice that what I'm going through, my first stab at the exit interview process is if you don't have a CRM, I've been using Trello. And what I've found over the last few weeks with these interviews that I'm participating in is really be prepared. Go in, look at the login, the usage history, the survey, look at any blog notes, because that establishes a lot of credibility with your customer. One question I asked today, and I've used in my past experience at Disney was, hey, Mr. Customer, if I could give you a magic wand, can you just tell me what it would be to really get you back to where you were, say, 6 months ago? Period. Let them talk. And that right there is like an aha moment of like, wow, I don't really get that question much, but it lets them regurgitate what they're looking for. And then you can come back at the end and say, okay, I hear what you're saying. I hear it. You keep on repeating that. I hear what you just said, and show them that you're listening. And then right there, you can come with an offer.
I love it. That's thank you so much, Tim, because yes, come prepared. Absolutely. I didn't quite cover this here because to Amy's point, wasn't quite sure where people are, but come prepared and come prepared with a very open mind because you don't know what you're going to hear. They might be okay with it. They might start getting upset. Like you're all over the emotional map. That's why it's so important to practice and become comfortable. I'll just give this suggestion. One of my favorite things when I'm interviewing is tell me more about that. Just in that way, just sort of like, hey, tell me more about that.
Probing and digging in more.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised at how much they'll go, and just be real brief. Let them do 90% of the talking, and you're there just to ask questions, right?
Yeah, you've got it. And something like that, again, we all give the surface level when you go, oh, how are you? And everyone's like, oh, I'm good. And then when you really dig down, you find out, I don't know, something horrible happened during the day. They feel like crap, but we always give that surface level answer. So what you're trying to do with any interview is get past that. That's why it's so important to establish the trust, or like you do with the credibility, with coming with that information at the beginning so that you can lower those defenses a bit and then ask a question like, tell me more. How did that work for you? Whatever the case may be for however they're answering, but it's amazing what people open up and tell you if they feel that they trust you and they feel safe enough to be able to do it. So thanks for that, Tim. Love it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Who do we have? Sorry, I can only see a little bit. Karima?
Yes. Well, thank you for this awesome webinar, and kudos to you for continuing.
Thanks.
My question was more around, so maybe it's two questions in one, but this interview, is the decision maker the right person to have the interview with? Do you have like your power user and decision maker? Like, what is the right person? Do you have maybe 2 separate interviews or multiple, or do you have them in a group? So I know it's too many questions
Yeah,
in one.
no, it's actually, no, it's great. And I'll tell you why. Who comes into the interview depends on the purpose of the interview you decide at the beginning. So if you're just going to interview decision makers, and that becomes pretty easy. It really depends on the purpose. My recommendation is, because of different types of relationships, one-on-one, because otherwise then it becomes a focus group. There's different dynamics that happen whenever you add people into the interview. So do it one-on-one, and then that person can feel comfortable enough to be able to open up and let you know what their true thoughts, feelings, and desires are.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Have any more hands up? Sorry, I just have to open my screen here. Did you want to ask a couple questions, Ed?
Yeah, I got a couple if people are just listening. What are your thoughts on recording like a Zoom when you do this and then editing it later?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And the reason is because you want to transcribe it. The
Yeah.
worst thing you want to do is try to take notes and listen and keep that space. So when you're creating this and that trust is established and people are comfortable, you know, as quickly as I do, that it can, like, that trust can be gone in a second. If, you know, you always have your head down, you might be writing notes, you might be typing, but psychologically they're kind of wondering, well, is something else going on? Am I missing something? And what you start finding is people will just shut down. And so what could have started very open becomes very guarded, and then you're just not getting the responses. So you absolutely want to record so you can transcribe. And that's where you're going to find all of those stories, because it's way too hard to keep up by writing or typing.
Yeah, and the idea you talked about, telling the story and then editing that and then showing people this is what they said. Don't read the text, actually watch what they said and how they said it. It seems like that would be very powerful.
Absolutely. And that's a great thing, is this can be, so not just for the exit interview, but for all your interviews, this can be leveraged in all different ways.
Right.
It does take time to clean the data. The AI is not the best, makes a lot of mistakes. Somebody's going to, you can hire someone outside to clean up. You don't need to do that, just to do that data cleaning. And then the great thing then is the categorizing can be done. You can start setting those up and then just tagging the data. If this is a product issue, then, you know, you can certainly get product involved, because they may or may not be hearing this stuff either, or they may be hearing it differently. And so I agree with you. Being able to record and use that, and even the transcripts are amazing at really humanizing what's going on.
What about after a save? Like a lot of times people will attempt to save the customer.
Right.
They give notice, I'm quitting, you know, I'm switching to someone else. Oh, wait, you know, and then people want to try to do the save. Is it appropriate then to then say, well, it looks like we can't convince you otherwise, you're gone. Would you talk to someone, you know, give some feedback, or does that, you just not do that?
I don't think there's anything wrong with asking. I really don't. And then it's in their hands if they feel comfortable or not. Again, the biggest psychological hurdle is, like with any of us, when we make a decision to leave, we're already mentally moving into the future. So you're not going to get like tons of participants for this just because of that. That's why it's so important. As soon as you get like the first whiff of, oh, they're leaving and like the decision's been made, that is the time to go in and ask, because literally every minute, hour, day that ticks by, the fewer people will actually want to participate.
I have another if people are going to jump in. Why 2 interviewers?
Part of it is because you want to be able to, it's part is it for training. The second part is that person may not be available with different schedules, different time zones. Ideally, I think Harris had mentioned it. If you have a little team, that's sort of the best, 4 or 5. But when you're first starting out, 2 people is better because people move around, they change jobs. So you're really looking to have that established so the whole program doesn't fall apart if it's just dependent on one individual. So that's why I suggest 2. And then from there, definitely, if you can spread it out and make this, again, part of a bigger customer feedback strategy, then it's better. 2, 3, 4, 5, even across departments. Like there's the sky's the limit here with how big you want to take it. But certainly 2 to start, and then building that little team. I think interviews are a lot of fun. They can be, a lot of work as well, but wow, what you learn is just amazing.
Mhm. And one other question. Do you tell them about the gift in advance? In other words, do you say, if you spend some time with us, we'd be happy to make no, you're nodding your head. So that's a surprise. You want that to be a surprise.
In this case, definitely not.
Okay.
It's kind of like, if you think about it, a relationship has just ended, friendship, romantic relationship, doesn't really matter. And then the person's like, well, hey, I'll take you out for dinner if it feels wrong. Cause again, they're mentally already moving down the road. The reason why I suggest the appreciation thank you gift is, even if it's like they're really upset, they are not happy, it's at least a gesture that says, thank you, I appreciate the time you took. And what it might do is move them from, way down here in terms of their view of your company to maybe up here. And it may not seem like a lot, but we know how important that word of mouth marketing is. And so it tends to do that. It tends to just take a little bit of sting out of it. But it's particularly for exit interviews, this is not the time to be trying to, and it feels more like a bribe with some sort of money or appreciation gift. These 2 were monetary, but they don't have to be. And I didn't want to get all into that. But you can always offer something else that's appropriate to your company and the values of your company.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think if I could have put a big no on that one, I would have done it. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions from anybody?
I'm just curious of our little group that's left here. I know Amy's done them and Tim's done them. For the rest of you, anyone else done these? Have you ever conducted or been a part of an exit interview?
No, I haven't.
No.
Mm-mm.
Are you guys
Very
looking to do something like that, Stacy?
No, well, I guess it probably would have been very helpful in the last position that I held. But we lost a lot of our customers due to COVID. We had a lot of healthcare customers that lost their elective surgeries. And so when they cut expenses, IT was one of them. So, some of them, we had just started projects in their area. And so it was the first one to go. So, I'm not sure that we could categorize them as being unhappy with us or not getting the products or the services that they purchased. It was just the way of the world right at that moment,
Right.
I do about 1 each week. We've got around 500 customers, and we're seeing churn happening once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
It's every week-ish. It's a save play, we call it, and I'm the one that's doing all those. So it's very relevant. I've picked up some good ideas from your presentation today. Thank you.
That's great. Jordan, do you mind me asking,
Sure.
What's the participation rate when you reach out, or when are you asking them to participate? Really curious about this.
Yeah, 2/3 acceptance rate, because
Great.
I come from a sales background, so
Okay.
I don't take a silence as a no, and I'll follow up,
Okay.
2-3 times before I get them on the call. Or sometimes I just call them up and surprise them, and we have a conversation. I would say it doesn't last 30 minutes. It's usually 5 to 10 minutes. I capture that. Then I summarize it into an email to the relevant parts of the organization. Usually it's a standard group. And then when it happens is as soon as a CSM has gotten some confirmation or assurance that this is likely going to be churn here and that they want out, they're looking to cancel, they've moved to competition already, for example, then it gets forwarded over to me and I run my play. So I'd say within about 5 business days, I'm usually able to talk to most folks.
That's great. Are you are you recording the calls, first of all? And second of all, do you have like a central place where it's all held?
No. And that's why I was kind of disappointed to hear that you don't recommend hiring a third party, because I really want to hire a third party.
You can absolutely do that. I would certainly make sure though that it fits into your strategy. I know Ed's pointing at me. Happy to talk to you about that. If you want to hit me up there, either on LinkedIn or my email, that sounds great. And we can talk about that further, but definitely, I hear you. It's a lot. It really is. And sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge in terms of just even getting yourself mentally prepped to go into those discussions.
Yeah. Can I ask one question? It's sort of specific and analytical. So when we have more than one reason that the customers decided to churn, is it too much to go as far as saying, well, there's some check boxes, they're all kind of the same proportions, or is it wise to go even a step further and say 80% of the reason had to do with product, 20% had to do with onboarding, for example? Am I splitting it too fine by doing that?
I don't think so. I think the more information, the better, particularly if that's the case. And then, of course, my recommendation would be for product to start doing customer interviews or user interviews to find out why it's 80% versus 20% on the onboarding. To me, that indicates where the problem area really lies. And then it's all about, well, let's start digging further into this to find out what is it specific that is it, features that are unavailable, or is it, and sometimes too, it's promises made by sales on features that aren't available. That stuff all needs to be really dug into to find out. So I would say that makes for a great case for just more information.
Yeah.
Jordan,
And a third party possible.
Yes. Jordan, I've also done where primary and secondary. So in your situation, what if it was 80% primary product, 20%, I don't know, whatever you said. What
onboarding.
What if the secondary reason was 100% pricing? What would that tell you? It's the secondary, but it's 100%. And so you can't, it's like, I really left because of the product, because your price is too high. It doesn't do what you like. It's not worth it. So if you improved your product or lowered your price, so I tend to do primary, secondary, if there's a secondary.
That's good. Yeah. That's good.
I like it.
That you're not leaving part of the story out.
Yeah.
But one is bigger than the other. Yeah. Or
yeah. But there's just to make sure you're giving that full picture, because there are usually sometimes more than one reason why the customer's leaving.
Right.
There definitely is, Amy. I'll back you up on that. There's definitely more than one reason. And sometimes that's why, if you can, Jordan, push those interviews out just a tad bit longer to probe a little more to find out what those are, because you are just getting those sort of social answers at the beginning and you want to go deeper. And then you find, oh, it was because of this, then this, then this. That's why the decision was made. But if you're not taking the time, you're only getting what you think is happening here, but you missed, to Amy's point, those steps before. And actually the decision was made back here but that's not what they're actually telling you when you're speaking with them.
Anita, if you were to have one person own this program to do it well, who is it? And my follow-up question to it is, how do you remain unbiased? Because it's easy for me to be the guy that's like, well, it's everyone else's problem, right?
Right.
You know,
it really depends on the organization, and again, how far you want to keep it from those established relationships in the company. I mean, the customer has. I still think it's kind of best for customer. Where are you? You're in the middle now. Best for customer success. I just think that it ties so well into those other parts of the job that customer success does. And then it can branch over to marketing, to sales, to product. So that's really, really where I think it should be kept. If I had to kind of put my hat anywhere, I'd put it there.
Thanks for the free coaching session.
Yeah.
You're welcome. And feel free again, like hit me up on LinkedIn. This is my passion, so I'm always happy to talk about it. Tim, do you have another question?
Yeah, thank you. Now, I wanted to add on the onboarding experience too, because as a CSM, I do both. I'm responsible for onboarding and renewals currently, and what I'm finding myself doing is working backwards. So starting with the renewal end in mind, but then when I'm onboarding, I'm starting to ask questions at what we call a kickoff meeting.
Yep.
Of, put yourself in the shoes of we're 30 days before renewal. What's your goals?
Mm-hmm.
Establish that, really spin off that kickoff meeting and get them excited and build the momentum, because you can always utilize that as a key trend during that whole journey map at every quarterly check-in. And my company doesn't do that currently with QBRs or EBRs just yet, but just honing back to those goals throughout the whole year, and then just focus on that, because at the end of the year, with whether it's a yearly or monthly renewal, you got to keep that in mind. So yeah, onboarding I think is critical to really set the stage and keep checking in with them.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add that onboarding renewal is kind of like the two pillars of it all, right?
It is. And if you can, I love that you said this, Tim, like my heart sang when I heard you say it. It continues throughout the entire journey. Like, we're just talking the exit interview, but I hope I'm making it clear. This should be like right from the start. These discussions should be happening, because it's kind of like, and I do say this, the customer journey is a lot like a romantic relationship. You can't just show up, on your anniversary with some flowers and chocolates and think everything's going to be okay, and then be shocked when, they walk out the the door and you have divorce papers. But a lot of companies operate that way. You need to be checking in regularly. And to your point, what are those success metrics? They identified them at the beginning, but also have they changed? Like 12 months is a long time. Like the company could be pivoting. And now what was their definition of success when you first started might be vastly different 6, 8, 9 months down the road. If you can identify that before the renewal, like there's massive power in that.
I definitely agree. And I catch myself, I just did a churn analysis last month. And again, I'm only maybe 3 months in the company. And I just analyzed 500 accounts and identified what are considered like a trauma list. And some of the customers you really need to start reaching out to and getting that data, and just pick up the phone and call them, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And I think in this community, within SaaS, I think there's a huge opportunity there to be human. Just pick up the phone and ask them questions and find out what their challenges are.
Right. And that's actually the customer feedback bit, that if you can standardize those questions and have the other CSMs asking them, it's not quite the same as a formal one, but is it a great step toward that.
Establish the relationship.
Yep.
And it's not so much focused. Data is important, but have a meaningful conversation with somebody. Ask them what their challenges are.
Yeah. And so I'm going to say this too, how they feel. because
Right.
again, decisions are based on feelings first, then it becomes cognitive second. It can be like a split second in between, but find out how they're feeling. Like, how are you feeling about this? Whatever it may be, the particular stage in the journey, what has changed, whatever it may be for them. But
Mhm.
the earlier you start it, certainly the better it is. It sounds like you've got some great stuff there. Love that you did a churn analysis, like fantastic. And then this will just start filling in those gaps, because all companies know what their major, churn risks are, and why customers are churning. But what about those accounts that you thought it was green, looking good, great health, and then all of a sudden they're out the door, and it's like,
Yeah.
what happened here? Everything looked good, but to your point, it's about the relationship, and then asking those questions to keep your finger on the pulse. Something
Also
changed.
finding too is that if an account is say 6 months out and they're only using maybe 1 or 2 licenses, for example,
Mhm.
and that may be okay.
Yeah.
Maybe if they purchased 5, but you also don't want to open up Pandora's box for no reason. And I'm hearing that too. And I thought that was really interesting, and just really looking to learn from others based on that, because that could really hurt. You may wake them up, but they were doing fine the whole time. So more reason to have check-ins, but bring value, not just
Yes.
sending a check-in email like,
Yes.
okay, maybe it's a helpful video, or because they get so many emails. Customers get too many emails every day. So yeah, opening up Pandora's box is the other side of it too.
Right,
So I can
right.
go on, and this is really interesting information.
Yeah, great. I'm again, like, kudos to you for starting this and starting to move your thinking that way. Interviews and doing this, like I said, it's the most expensive, it's the most time consuming, it's the most laborious.
Right.
But to me, the payoff is certainly worth that extra effort. Surveys can go out at any time. They're simple, they're easy, but they just give
Yeah.
you trends. They don't give you this really deep stuff that, again, to Amy's point, they gave
Sure.
reason 1, 2, but really reason 2 was what was driving reason 1. You only discover that by talking.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me to ask these questions and
Oh, I
answer.
love it.
Appreciate that.
Seriously, my kids are old enough, they can feed themselves. So it's all good. Life's good.
Right.
Well, I think we're pretty good here. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, thank you once again, Anita. And if I collect any emails, or if anyone
Yeah.
here wants to connect to you and send a quick question, thanks so much. Very, very helpful.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
that's
Ed. Thanks,
great.
everybody else too.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. And feel free to connect with me over there on LinkedIn. I have the orange top. It's pretty easy to spot me if you type my name in.
Great job.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See ya.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.